Welcome to the special edition of When Opinions Collide. I'm your host, John Arthur Fiala, and I'm joined with Robyn Story. We just finished up a taping of debate, and I'd like to ask her more about her story. She's got a very interesting and frankly poignant story about what happened with her son and really her journey towards being an advocate for the vaccination issue. And with that, I won't speak much more for her myself. I'll let her go. Robyn?
Thanks. So, hopefully, your viewers heard some of in the beginning about what had happened with my son and how I considered myself to be a very normal person who didn't think about vaccines at all. And when he was vaccinated at 2 months old, he went into a very deep, unwakeable sleep, several hours of very deep, deep sleep. It was very uncharacteristic for him as a colicky baby. And when he woke, he experienced a high pitched scream. It was very scary. I was on the phone off and on with the doctor. I probably should have taken him to the ER, but I was basically told not to. I was told that it was normal, give him Tylenol, and all of that. And the fallout of it was that his head began to grow to accommodate, I'm assuming, his swollen brain. He developed eczema, his face, um, elbows, knees, ankles, wrists, and he began reacting to food when he started eating food at 6 months old. And I had him tested, and it turns out that he had 12 allergies. And so two of them were deadly, and one of them is far more serious than the other. It's the peanut allergy is very serious. So between the ages of about 3 and 7, he went into anaphylaxis 5 times and had his life saved with epinephrine. And I'm not a perfect parent. I made mistakes. It's always my fault when he's exposed. Several times I have delayed in giving him the epinephrine. I have really run the risk of losing my son because I was scared of hurting him with this big needle. It's like the gauge of an upholstery needle. And so I had to learn from this. And having this child, it changed who I am. It's changed who I am starting the night that he was vaccinated. I stayed up all night researching to see, what is that scream? Surely someone else has talked about this scream. I mean, it's like this wild animal. It's not a normal sound. And once I began talking about it, I wrote about it in 2014, and I put it, I put his story out there with the phrase that I had found online, and the phrase was the DTaP scream. And I hear people now, and I see people now talking about the DTaP scream, and I know how much his story has reached people. It's been read millions of times. It ran in a magazine, and it was called "My Child is Vaccine Injured, Just Like Yours," because everybody thinks that their kids are vaccinated and that they turned out fine. And most people's kids are not fine. They just don't know what fine means. There's like a new normal now. And the new normal doesn't necessarily mean, it means common. It doesn't mean normal and acceptable. It just means that everybody has these problems with their skin or their attention or emotional disturbances or respiratory issues. It's just the new normal. And so my life changed overnight. On that night, I stayed up all night researching the scream, researching SIDS. I was scared to death of losing him. And then immediately we started changing the household cleaners that we use. We changed the soap that we use. We made sure that he only wore organic cotton clothing. When he began to eat, all of the food that he ate was organic. We changed the water to only spring water. There's all of these changes. Like anything that goes on the skin needs to be so safe that you could eat it on a spoon if you needed to eat it on a spoon. There's no more putting toxic lotions on. We don't use sunscreen. There's all of these things that we do now. And it made me who I am. So I started researching vaccines. It was November 13th, 2009. It was when he got vaccinated. And I began, I'm sorry, not November, November 13th, 2009, I began researching, and then I did not write about it publicly for several years. I just wasn't ready for it. And then I wrote that first piece. It came out in January of 2014. And I was living in Colorado at the time. And what happened was that people started calling me and saying, this legislation is coming in Colorado, and they are trying to take away your rights to use exemptions. They're trying to make it be that you no longer have the right to download a form, that you need to go to your doctor and you need to get re-educated on vaccines from someone who studied them for half a day in medical school. And I wasn't okay with that at all. And a very good friend called me, and she said that there was going to be a radio program, and that somebody who ultimately ended up becoming a GlaxoSmithKline lobbyist, but at the time she was pretending at least to be an organic farmer mom who was pro-vaccine, I guess. I don't know, delayed vaccine, something like that, and then like saw the light, became extremely pro-vaccine. So she's representing the other side. And they called me and they said, "Don't you think that they need another point of view on this radio show?" And I thought, "Oh, totally. Yes, they need another point of view. We should find someone." And I started thinking about who could go on this radio show. And my friend was like, "Robyn, no, I meant you. I meant that you should go on the radio show." So I did agree to go on the radio show. And ultimately, the radio host said, "You know what? No, I don't want two people on at once. I don't want any sort of like contentious environment. Let's not do it that way." And ultimately, I didn't go on. He only had her side on. And not long after that, there was an opportunity to appear with the same person on a local news station. And somebody from NVIC gave me a call, and I don't work for NVIC. I've never worked for NVIC. It is the National Vaccine Information Center. But they did say that they wanted me to appear on this news program, and it was going to be like a 3-minute debate, very, very short, right? Short questions, short answers, that was going to run in its entirety. And they said that if I wasn't going to do it, then they were going to cancel. They didn't want anybody else to do it. So psychologically, I was already there because I had already said yes to the other thing that didn't work out. Like, as far as when you sit around and you think, oh, someone should do something about that. And then finally it dawns on you that you are that person, you're that somebody. So mentally, I had already made that leap that I was that somebody. I go on the news. It went really, really well, very well. It was a great piece. And then the legislation was really going full force. And so we were in Denver, and there were maybe 36 of us in the Colorado Coalition for Vaccine Choice, which has now become this huge organization. They're more of a health choice organization now. Sorry, their name is escaping me. And I think they probably have 6,000 members, something like that. But back in 2014, we fought that legislation, and ultimately we won. It had to be gutted down to just a shell of its former self, live on the Senate floor, and we all celebrated this victory. It was great for us. And then that was it for me. I was hooked. I absolutely loved I loved being that person. And I think maybe as a lawyer, I was already doing this defending people who are not capable for whatever reason of defending themselves. Like, that's who I am naturally. So I was very drawn to this work. And so I started helping. Right after that came Oregon, like maybe the next year. And so I started helping in Oregon, and then it just like snowballed into all of these other states getting hit with this legislation time and time and time again. And what is most interesting is that when Polly Tommy and Andrew Wakefield and Del Bigtree and all that, when they came through America with their movie Vaxxed, it came out, I think it was like April 2016 when it got kicked out of the Tribeca Film Festival. Polly bought a bus. And I'll tell you, I told Polly that I thought it was so dumb. I just thought it was the dumbest idea ever. So she bought this bus. They painted it black. They called it the Becks Bus. And they were going to drive this bus across the nation. And they were going to have moms sign their vaccine injured children's names on this bus as this like moving memorial. And I thought that was a waste of time and money. And then Polly, just like by the grace of God, happened to actually be right next to my neighborhood in Denver, and the Vax bus, they had just bought it and it broke down. And she called me. She was like, "Wait, don't you live here?" And I'm like, "Yes, I live here, Polly." So I drove out there and I sat with her, and I ended up being one of the first Vax interviews. And she's just such a compassionate listener, and she asks really brilliant questions, and she hears you. And then they provide a platform for thousands and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands more people to hear your story. Vaccines do cause autism. Vaccines do cause type 1 diabetes. In my family, vaccines cause a deadly allergy that we live with every day. This does happen no matter what any doctor or public health expert is telling you. All of us moms are telling you that they're wrong and that we are right. And she gave us the first platform for that. Polly went state to state, city to city for all of these, bring Vaxxed to like whatever, right? Bring Vaxxed to Austin, bring Vaxxed to whatever city. They went through the entire country, and these Facebook groups were made of bring Vax to your city. And then it was like Valentine's Day 2019, when Adam Schiff began going after all of our rights, and all of a sudden, state after state after state got hit with vaccine legislation. And in 2019, those groups just switched. They all switched, and they all became legislative advocacy groups. And it's just been the most amazing thing because, let me take a sip of water. Because the truth is that Polly and this stupid bus that ended up being the greatest thing ever, built a backbone of advocacy. She literally built the backbone of advocacy all across the country because of her going to city with the movie. So in 2019, when all of this legislation was introduced, for the most part, they didn't stand a chance because these people were already organized. They were already in contact with one another. They already had resources. They were already educated. They knew where their capital was. They knew who their lawmakers are. And so we lost Maine and we lost New York, but everybody else was victorious, all of it. And I had to send Polly a note and I had to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I thought that you shouldn't have spent the money to buy this big bus, because this bus built, like literally built, the medical freedom movement city by city. So I am incredibly thankful for how much the world has changed since I started doing this in March of 2014, because we can't be stopped now. We will absolutely win this war.
So that's an interesting point you bring up. You say we'll win this war. I want to ask you, there are a lot of folks that bring up the question, well, what do we do to replace vaccines? They say that the vaccines are, the thought is that vaccines are a wall that are protecting us from all of these different diseases. And the question is, what's the answer, or what would be your answer to vaccines? What would be the replacement for that kind of medical care?
So the answer is that we don't have a direct replacement to offer. I mean, there's people who go and get a different type of like homeopathic type vaccination. It's not something that I know anything about, and it's not something that I do. But you have to get back to nature, right? Have a vaginal birth. Don't use pitocin. Don't give vitamin K. I wouldn't even give oral vitamin K. I mean, I did that for my second daughter, but I just wouldn't do that now. Delay the cord cutting when your baby is born. That's just crazy that a baby's born and we cut the cord, and like I don't know what percentage of their blood is in the cord, like 20%. It's huge. It's a huge amount of blood in the cord, and it's going to go to scientific research instead of in your baby. That's just crazy. So delay the cord clamping. Babies have vernix on them, and that's protective, and so rub that in instead of washing that off with Johnson and Johnson baby products. Breastfeed your baby for at least 6 months. Don't put them on a toxic mattress. Find something that's really non-toxic and doesn't have the fire retardant chemicals. I mean, a fireproof mattress never saved any baby's life, right? You don't need to go and find a fireproof mattress. Have a HEPA air filter running in their room at all times. So whenever they're sleeping, they get this chance to breathe this really clean air. We clock diapered. I would tell anyone to clock diaper just because I saw how my sensitive child reacted to diapers. I mean, it's just kind of disgusting to put those chemicals on your baby's skin. We kept our babies home for 6 months. So we're not those people who have a baby and then think, oh, we're some sort of like indignant entitlement to go out in public with a newborn. That's not who we are. We kept our kids home. My firstborn never got a cold until he was about 17 months old. And my secondborn caught a cold, actually was the flu, maybe when she was 18 months old. And people were like, how did you go that long without your kids getting sick? And the answer is, well, I'm not bombarding their immune system with 8 things at once every 60 days at the doctor's office. But number two is that we kept them at home. You know, that's the safest thing that you can do for a baby. So we had a zero pesticide rule when it came to feeding them. They just ate, I mean, if you're at the grocery store and there's only conventional berries because there's no organic, you're not buying berries. Like go to the freezer department and go buy those organic ones. So, and another thing is that we try to follow the Weston A. Price diet, especially for their formative years, where they're eating meats and fats, you know, and they're eating grass-fed butters and things like that. Sunscreen. We don't put sunscreen on our kids. I had a friend who made me a sunscreen. She made it out of coconut oil with raspberry seed oil and carrot seed oil. And I think that ultimately it has an SPF of maybe like 15 or 25, something like that. And it's waterproof only in the sense that coconut oil is a little bit waterproof. That's the sunscreen that they use. It's just so imperative that your children are allowed to get sunshine. I don't put them out in the sun at noon. If they're out in the sun at noon, then they'll wear a rash guard shirt to prevent them from getting sunburn. But I'm not going to load them up with chemical sunscreens in order to prevent the burn. I'll put something physical on them. And the other thing would be we don't treat fevers. Like my kid, it would have to be miserable for us to treat fevers. And so, I don't know if the real temperature, like average temp really is 98.6 anymore. I actually think it's lower. But there's people who, when the temperature is at 99 or it's at 100, those are also normal temperatures, but people are running out, getting Tylenol, getting Advil. And Dr. Suzanne Humphreys has a really great line about doing that to your child. She said it's like your immune system is an attack dog, and that when there's an invader, it needs to rev up, right? It needs to get hot. It needs to prevent the virus from replicating. And that when you put that fire out with a fever reducer, it's like shooting your attack dog during a burglary. And then like you're wondering why you're being burgled. So we just do not use fever reducer unless my kids are absolutely miserable. So there's no one thing, right? It's a lifestyle. And I think that a lot of people who believe in vaccination, which for me, it is a belief system, it is very similar to believing in a religion for all of the reasons I said before about just how much people admire these doctors as leaders and hand their babies over and all that. It's just not a religion that I subscribe to. A lot of the people who believe in that religion and follow that religion are not willing to do the 15 other things that I just listed. They're not willing to do that work. Some do both, but for the most part, there's like a real dichotomy there. So it's not a simple answer. The answer is you got to do things the hard way.
So yeah, that was going to be one of my questions for you. What do we do for the single mother who doesn't have that support structure in place to be able to stay or leave the child at home for that long? But that's kind of an interesting conversation. There are a lot of folks who would say that vaccination is their one hope to be able to get over that. Uh, I don't know if that's really the case or not. However, what would you say to those to those people who find anti-vax or people who are anti-vax? I hate terms like that, but they say that they're anti-vax or they're pro-vax, and they look at people who don't vaccinate their children and they say that you're doing this out of fear and you're actually ignoring the science. What would you say to those folks?
Um, I'm not afraid of vaccines anymore. So the reason that I choose not to vaccinate is actually not fear based. And I think that I've demonstrated that just through conversations with you. I would say when my son was hurt, when he was 2 months old, yeah, I was scared of vaccines. And I'm a decade into it now. I would say it took me about a year and a half to 2 years of researching every day. And I mean, reading the science every day, not reading like hocus pocus websites, probably 18 months to 2 years of daily reading before that fear went away. I mean, yes, I was afraid he was going to get a vaccine preventable disease and die. So then you have to start looking. What is this disease? What are the symptoms? How is this disease acquired? How do you support and treat a child through this disease? What were the death rates before there was a vaccine? Why? I mean, you look at measles and like 500 kids were dying. Do you know why they were dying? I didn't even learn this until recently. I learned it from Paul Offit, who's the biggest vaccine pusher in America. Is the number one cause of death from measles is not encephalitis or pneumonia. It was dehydration. Like, are we supposed to believe we don't have a way to treat dehydration now? So now, if my kids get sick twice now, I've taken my son in to get just an IV of saline. He feels instantly better because it's like kids get in this cycle of being dehydrated and they're vomiting and becoming more dehydrated. And it doesn't have to be that way. There's simple solutions. Go get a saline IV and they're fixed. So you're going to kill me, John. What was the question?
No, you actually answered it. I mean, the question was, what would you say to people who claim that if you're anti-vaccine, and by the way, this is a fair critique of some folks who are anti-vaccine. Like I said, I've met people who have the crystals and they hold up the crystal. It's like a
Oh,
whole
right,
nother
right.
religion, right? And those people, I think, are terrible spokesfolks for at least vaccine skepticism, right?
Yeah. And I remember your question now. So I mean, so the truth is that when he was hurt, yeah, I was making a fear-based decision. But now that I'm this many years in, and actually by the time I was 18 months to 2 years in, I was the one making the educated decision. And it was a far, far more educated decision than parents who are vaccinating. And then I realized parents who are vaccinating are the ones making the fear-based decision. Just like me, I was afraid. And, with the example with measles and is he going to die, blah, blah, blah. I had to realize that that's not worth being afraid of, that that's not going to happen. The odds are that that's not going to happen. I'll tell you, we lived in the developing world for 2 years, and my kids couldn't even catch chickenpox there in this other country. Like, they never caught a single vaccine preventable disease. And actually, we didn't know anybody who had chickenpox or measles or anything else either. And it just makes me wonder, how contagious are these things? But anyway, so once you get to the point that I got to, you're the one making educated decisions. They're the ones making fear-based decisions.
All right, fair enough. So, the next question I have for you, and by the way, I've heard an interesting response from the medical community. There, I forget which study it was. I know I shouldn't be quoting studies I don't have in front of me, but the link between autism and vaccines. A lot of folks have brushed that off, and
Yeah.
the best response I've seen from the medical community, and for the life of me, I don't have that in front of me, but they said that the reaction to the vaccine was due to a pre-existing condition, or is often due to a pre-existing condition in the child that most
Mhm.
likely would have been triggered one way or the other. The thing that just happened to do it is the vaccine. There are other traumatic incidents that can trigger
Yeah.
vaccine injury. What would be your response to that?
So I know exactly what you're talking about. You're referring to the mitochondrial disorder. And so this was the Hannah Pauling case. It was in the vaccine injury compensation program. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on it. It was a very, very important case. And there were a lot of other vaccine injury claims that were hinging on that. And what happened with it was absolutely tragic. There was an expert witness who switched sides, and actually, I guess he knew Hannah Pauling's dad, that he had worked with him, and he knew this child ahead of time. And he knew that she had something called a mitochondrial disorder that was undiscovered at the time she was vaccinated. But for the vaccine, this wouldn't have happened to her, and she became autistic. And the government just conceded that case, pulled her out, settled it, and then they kicked out all these other cases. It's kind of a really long story. And so when that case was leaked, I don't know if it was several months or a couple of years later, it was under wraps for a while and it was leaked. And the CDC had to answer for that when it was leaked, and HHS had to answer for that. And so they had to carve out this exception. And it's really interesting. There's a clip of Julie Gerberding, and she's on CNN, and she's explaining vaccines don't cause autism. And then, like, exactly explains how vaccines do cause autism in these kids. It's an amazing clip, and copies of it are still out there. And she's saying, well, when you have these kids and they have this pre-existing condition, and this like immune activation event can trigger this sort of reaction, and it could be a high fever. And she goes, as you know, vaccines can cause a high fever, dot 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 dot, right? And so that's exactly how that happens. But then experts want to say, well, this condition is very rare. But is it? Is it really rare? And they also want to say it's a mystery how it's caused. And it's not a mystery. It's about the energy in the mitochondrial cells. When you're sick and your body needs to mount a big defense, it needs to be able to call on your energy within the cells, within the mitochondria, to overcome this sickness. And these kids can't do it. They just can't do it. And so the question is, where is this problem coming from that these kids have a mitochondrial disorder? And the answer is all of the aluminum they received on the day of birth, 2 months, 4 months, and 6 month vaccines, right? Because all of that aluminum is interfering with the mitochondrial portion of their cells, and it's setting them up with this condition that isn't surfaced yet. And then when they go and they get the MMR at 12 or 15 or 18 months, whenever their parents decide to give it to them, that is a major immune event, especially if it's given with other vaccines, if it's given with the chickenpox vaccine. And so these kids, they're just lost. They're lost on that day. And it's not rare. Obviously, it's not rare. And it's not even a mystery about what's causing it. And a whole lot more research needs to be done.
So, and you brought up an interesting point. Aluminum, we've talked about mercury being in there before, and all of these irritants. There are folks who've said that if we just sort of reinvented the whole concept of how we formulate these vaccines, we could
Mm.
actually create a workable vaccine that doesn't cause these links. Is that something that you believe would work, or do you think that that's innately flawed. The very idea of the vaccine is flawed.
So, with the current vaccines we have, it would not work in the sense that the vaccine would not work. Our vaccines are not going to work without an adjuvant. You can have a live vaccine that works, and those are the ones that cause the big immune responses, such as MMR, chickenpox. Or you can have an inactivated vaccine that requires an adjuvant, and all of the licensed adjuvants in the United States are for children are aluminum adjuvants. And then aluminum has a whole host of problems, and it's not studied. And I really hope that we get to talk about that next time. So, in the sense of can we take today's vaccines and just remove the aluminum? No, the vaccines would not work. You would inject it, your body would overcome it very quickly, metabolize it, and then it would be like you were never vaccinated in the first place. The scary part is what the future holds, because now we're talking about DNA vaccines, mRNA vaccines. There's a whole host of other ways of making vaccines with and without adjuvants. And I don't know a lot about the future of vaccines, but I'll tell you the idea of it is to turn our own bodies into vaccine manufacturing plants. They want to be able to inject you with the vaccine and that it enters into your own cells and that your cells are then able to replicate and generate the antibodies. That's terrifying. How would you ever shut that off if something went wrong? I don't want my child's cells to become a vaccine manufacturing plant. So, and I don't know if that's like tied with an adjuvant free type vaccine that they're maybe planning in the future. I don't see any of this going well. No, I think that everything is going to have its own host of nightmare scenarios, no matter what path they choose for the future of vaccines.
So it's been wonderful talking to you. Really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
I guess if they really enjoyed this, to please let you know that they enjoyed this conversation and they enjoyed this debate, even though, it wasn't really too much of a debate. I think it had a really nice vibe to it. And request that we get to do this again, and maybe request that people that they know in real life get together, that an advocate gets together with an MD and that they do their own recording and put it out there and allow people to see that this conversation can be had in a very civil way.
Well, and thank you for being part of that. That's part of the whole vibe and message behind this program. We want to bring people on and have an actual discussion. I think people are tired of talk show hosts and guests yelling at each other and piping over. I tell folks when they come on, I do have a mute button, and I will mute you if you start talking over the other person if I sense that that's a problem. So I'm very glad that you're on. I'm glad that it's been a hopefully a productive conversation. You guys out in the listening audience and the watching audience, let us know in the comment section below if you're listening to us via podcast. Share it. Share the links via Twitter at When Opinions Collide or at Opinions Collide. Uh, is there anywhere that you'd like to be reached, or you are not reachable?
No, I am trying to be less in contact with people. Thank you,
You
though.
know what? I understand that Twitter can be interesting. All of them can be interesting. So, with that, thank you very much for being on, and hope to see you again.
All right. Thank you.